Hi, everybody. It's 12 o'clock and we only have about an hour, so we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jessica Ballard. I am the Director of Development at Lenape Valley Foundation. Thanks for joining our workshop series for caregivers. This one's focusing on self-care. It is going to be hosted by our Director of Training and Education, Nicole Wolf. Nicole has been at Lenape Valley for a number of years. She was previously our crisis director, and I know you guys are in for a great session with her. Just some housekeeping items. If you have questions that come up throughout Nicole's presentation, please type them as they come in the chat, and we'll have hopefully a few minutes at the end to review some pertinent questions and maybe have a little discussion. But if you could hold your questions until we get through the presentation, that would be great, but feel free to type them in the chat as they come up. We are recording this session, so if you do not want to be on video, you are welcome to turn that off. We will use the recording and make that available for folks who may have missed or would like to use this as a resource in the future. Thank you again for coming, and I'm going to let Nicole take it from here.
Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for taking this time out of your well-deserved lunch break, I'm sure, in the day to take some time for hopefully yourself. I did see the registration list and saw that we have a good variety of folks on. So I want to take a second to acknowledge first a disclaimer. I'm not, an expert on anything really. I'm not some omniscient self-actualized person that is an expert in self-care. This is something that I work on, every day to get better at this. So I hope to have time to maybe learn something from you all as well. But I have been overseeing crisis services for 14 years prior to taking this role of Director of Education and Training. And one of the things that I've done in that role is a lot of education of first responders, very high stress jobs that they have, also a form of a caretaker. And I train them on behavioral health, including self-care. So over the years, I've had some opportunity to learn some things, and I hope to be able to share some of that with you. Some of this will probably be a review for many of you, but we are going to, here's our rough agenda for the day. We're going to start with what is the stress response physiologically, because I think it's important to have that as a baseline in order to know why it's important to practice self-care moving forward. But I do recognize it will probably be a review for some of you. We're going to talk about the signs and symptoms and just some basic things to look out for when your system is just reaching overload. And then, most importantly, some just practical, usable strategies that hopefully as soon as this session ends, you have something that you can take with you to start practicing or continue practicing self-care. So the first thing I want to start out with is God, Allah, Odin, Mother Nature, whoever you pray to, ask for some serenity in this, because when it comes to looking at the stress response versus our response to stress, we have no control over our physiological and then therefore little control over our cognitive and emotional responses to stress. We do have a good amount of control over our decision to actively mitigate the impact of that, but very little control over how we physiologically respond to stressful things in our environment. So let's start with the Serenity Prayer pretty much every day. So the good thing is our stress response, while we have no control over it, is that it's not all bad. I mean, we need it. We need the fight, flight, freeze response. The things that are involved there are epinephrine and cortisol. Those are the hormones. It allows us, physiologically, it's changing our blood flow, getting more oxygen to our brain and our muscles, enhancing our heart rate and breathing, actually improving our immune function as an interesting side effect. But and that helps us feel more awake. It gives us that burst of energy. It improves memory to a degree, gives us strength and endurance to get through stressful times. You know, in the caveman days when, you know, you needed to get away from a saber-toothed tiger that was going to attack you, this is a very adaptive thing that was happening in our body, giving our body what we needed to protect ourselves. It was and still is critical to survival in a lot of ways. And in fact, there's like this sweet spot where there's an optimal level of stress that allows us to reach our peak performance. As you can see, though, it tends to fall off at a certain point, and there is no magic number or amount of stress for any one individual person. So I'm not going to give you a calculation to be able to figure out, but just so you know, there is a sweet spot in terms of how stress can help you reach your optimal level of functioning across the board. What happens is that at some point we transition where the amount of stress puts us into system overload, and all those same things that epinephrine and cortisol did for us in a positive way then start to take a little bit of a negative turn. This happens with prolonged stress or just frequent many stressors, and it's that sort of either prolonged or constant up and down of the hormones and the blood pressure and breathing and heart rate and all of that can actually lead to negative implications, loss of memory. That crash of all those things can be really just it takes a toll on us physically. And there's actually been a ton of research on this. I put the website there, but if you just Google that Holmes-Ray life stress inventory, it's a list of maybe 20 events that a person could experience. And this is evidence-based, that all of these life events are given a numerical score, right? So some of the examples are death of a spouse or a family member, divorce, marriage, a personal injury or illness, change to a different line of work, any kind of life event. And what you do is you think back over the past year and you check off and note the score for each one of those things. And if your score is in the high range, so 150 points or more, there's a significant chance of a health breakdown in the near future. So stressful life events can lead to physical illness. What I find interesting about this is it helps to define stressful events, and they're not all negative. Some of the examples, I'll just throw some out there: marriage, pregnancy, outstanding personal achievement, revision of personal habits, vacation, major holiday. These are all things that for many people are considered positive, but they still come with some level of stress. Some of the other stressful events, we can't get through any training about self-care without talking about COVID. It's been critical in this high stress time, which has hit everyone. No one is immune to the impact of the stress of the pandemic. Some of the things that are on the higher point end: change in health of a family member, change in financial state, change to a different line of work. These are all things that have impacted people pretty significantly. Change in recreation, not a high point thing, but still something that is considered a stress. I mean, we certainly have been limited in what we can do to kind of blow off steam, if you will, and have balance. Change in number of family reunions. I know I'm a person that I had dinner weekly, family dinner at a restaurant with one particular part of my family, and that came to a screeching halt. That was certainly stressful. So the inventory can be a good tool to kind of get an idea of where you're at and just how important it is for you to, if you haven't already, either ramp up your self-care routine or start some kind of self-care routine. Now, all kinds of metaphors work here. You've heard my cup runneth over, or fill up my bucket or another person's bucket with positive things. The lantern, which was on the flyer. All analogies work, but since it's lunchtime in February, I decided, and I love to eat, I decided to go with a stew analogy. I think it works here in terms of identifying the impact of different kinds of stress. And I can't take full credit. I can't take credit for coming up with this analogy. I learned it from a gentleman by the name of Clark Parrish. If you want to look him up, he is well known in the world of peer support for law enforcement and self-care for law enforcement. He is a former law enforcement officer who suffered a breakdown and now has gone down a career path where he helps to educate and support first responders to practice good self-care. But I think this analogy fits well in terms of identifying all the different types of stress. So when you think of a pot of stew, you think of the main ingredients. There's some sort of broth, there's usually some kind of small bits of vegetables in there, and then usually there's some like bigger chunks of meat, right? So the broth can represent the day-to-day stress. This is stress that's common to all people, that involves daily decision making and problem solving. It's what motivates people to be more productive, and it's managed routinely. Some examples: which route am I going to take to work to avoid traffic? What do I make or order for dinner? I can't forget to pay the electric bill, right? These are things that are common to the human experience typically. The small bits of carrots and potatoes, the vegetables, are more like cumulative stress and can be a little bit more specific to the role of caretaker. Now, whether you are a therapist, a case manager, a family member, maybe a parent, whether or not your kids are struggling with some behavioral health issues or not, maybe you're a person who's caring for elderly parents, whatever type of caretaker you are, this sort of cumulative stress is the result of accumulated and sort of unrelieved exposure to a variety of stressors. And when these aren't managed, it can result in burnout. So some of the examples, if you're a therapist, it's got to meet productivity, got to get those productivity standards in. Did I ask the right questions in that session to get the right information? If you're a parent, my teenagers hate me, those kind of things. If I'm taking care of someone, did I remember to give those evening meds? It's those added stressors. And then I think another thing that's common to caretakers is the imposter syndrome. So the idea of like, who do I think I am to be in this role? I even started out this session with a disclaimer. I'm not an expert on this. I certainly am not immune to that imposter syndrome, but whether you're a leader in your role or in your professional or your personal life, we tend to struggle with that. And so when this kind of stress continues to build up and becomes unrelenting, it's that cumulative stress, it can be difficult. Then there's also sort of those big chunks of meat in the stew, which are critical incidents, things that are extraordinary events, provoke a high level of stress for everyone involved. They're typically sudden, disruptive, involve either an actual or a perceived threat of loss or an actual loss. Typically have a loss of control, a sense of a high vulnerability. This can be, a major injury or illness. to someone in your sphere or someone that you're caring for, or, you know, maybe a hospitalization, whether for physical health or behavioral health. It could be a suicide attempt or completion, something, you know, a critical incident. Now, what's important to know is that too much of any one of these things can cause your stew pot to overflow, right? That's where this analogy is, whether it's a cup or a lantern or a bucket or whatever, is that you want to keep it at an optimum level. And any one of these things, too much of any one of these things can cause your pot to overflow. It doesn't necessarily, people tend to assume it's going to be one of these critical incidents that is the straw that broke the camel's back or whatever, but it's not always. Sometimes it could just be a typical day, and, you know, that one, you know, accident on 6/11 that caused you to be 45 minutes late was just the thing that put you over the edge. Now, again, the pandemic can fall into all three of these categories, stressors related to COVID. So, I mean, PPE has become a day-to-day thing. God damn, I forgot my mask. You know, virtual schooling and telehealth feel never ending. And there's just been a lot of loss in a very short amount of time. So it can fall into all three categories. But, you know, we need to talk about how to make some room in the pot so that when these things happen, because these things will continue to happen in our lives. How do we make room in the pot so we're not on the verge of overflowing at every moment? Before we get to those specific strategies, we definitely want to talk a little bit about how to tell when you're reaching the top of your pot or it's overflowing or about to overflow. So we'll start with some signs that might be considered a little more subtle. So a change in productivity or a change in the way you manage your day-to-day routine. It might be productivity standards for therapists. It might be kind of keeping your schedule for the day, your daily schedule. Other examples, somatic complaints, you know, someone who, you know, you start to have headaches or feel nauseous, have different body aches and pains. We can sometimes carry our stress physically. I know for me, I get knots up here in my neck and shoulders. It could be poor time management, things not being completed on time, missing appointments, making just uncommon mistakes, or having, you know, showing indecisiveness when you were typically a more decisive person, showing just poor judgment, complaining more often than usual. Some of these can be considered more subtle signs, but something to be a little bit concerned about if you're seeing that. Things that are a little more concerning, if you're a person or you know someone who typically their home or maybe their desk or their office was always really neat and tidy, or you're typically everything in its place, everything has its place, everything in its place kind of person, and now things are unkempt, messy, cluttered. A significant change in appearance, either personal hygiene or pretty drastic appearance, hair or wardrobe changes can be indicative of something concerning. Getting into arguments either frequently or out of the ordinary with friends, family, coworkers, supervisors. Someone who maybe starts cursing more often than usual, or their general language and tone becomes more negative. Maybe you notice in a colleague that their documentation takes on a new tone of, you know, maybe a loss of compassion or empathy for your clients or the people that you're caring for. A loss of that unconditional positive regard that we have for our clients or for our kids or loved ones. And, you know, that isolation, being withdrawn, avoiding interactions, avoiding safe interactions. I realize right now we're not interacting as frequently as we have in the not too distant past. But when interactions are safe, even virtual interactions, but there's just an avoidance of that, or a withdrawal or an isolation from family, friends, and colleagues. These things are concerning. And it's not always easy to see these things in yourself. It's easier to see things in other people. So we're going to talk about the importance of self-reflection in this, and really taking a good, honest look in terms of these things. So what do? How do you stop the cycle, shift the tide, make room in the stew pot, whatever it might be? Well, I asked the question, how does a beaver build its dam? One stick at a time. That's what we do. There's not going to be some magic wand that you're struggling one day and fully engaging in the best possible self-care the next day. But if I could take us back to the Serenity Prayer for a second, this is where the courage comes in. This is where we go from where we have to sort of take control and to do the things that we can, because suffering from burnout is hard. Yes. Taking a second, especially as a caretaker, caretakers inherently are not good at taking care of themselves. They are better at taking care of other people. So it can be hard, but it's a matter of deciding which is more important. And, you know, we all know the phrase, you have to put on your own oxygen mask first. So I think that's probably why most of you are here today, because you're aware of that. But it's critical as a caretaker to practice good self-care. Even if it is certainly easier for a caretaker to look outward. So even if your primary reason is to be a good example for the folks that you're taking care of, if that's the only reason, it's critical. So who remembers Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, right? So the premise of that is that you have to meet your basic needs first, your needs for survival. So in his hierarchy, it's like food, shelter, clothing. Here, I think it's there. You know, are you eating well? Are you staying hydrated? Are you getting exercise? And I actually hate exercise. I consider exercise a four-letter word. But maybe it's just moving more, you know, having physical movement, because it's important for your physical health and well-being. And most people take better care of their cars than they do their own body. We keep the gas above a quarter tank. We, make sure we get regular oil changes and other maintenance. We make sure we let it run for a few minutes in the cold weather, just to get it going. But we don't do that for our own physical bodies. So it's really important to just take a little bit of time to make sure you're doing that. Caffeine, alcohol, and tobacco, there's a paradoxical effect of all of those. So yes, in the short term, all of those things really feel like they help. Caffeine, I have my cup of coffee every day. They certainly have the desired effect in the short term, right? But in the long term, the effects of all of those things are typically the opposite of what we want, and can be very damaging with long-term and excessive use. So be careful of excessive use of any one of those things. Sleep will make you, and lack of sleep will break you. If there's one thing that you take away from this or anything on self-care, it's get adequate sleep. So important. I mean, sleep is so important that it's used as a interrogation technique in, to disrupt someone's sleep or not let someone sleep to be able to get them to get to their breaking point to where they'll give up information. I mean, it is critical. And one of the kind of easy ways to make sure you're getting good quality sleep, it's not just about the amount of sleep, but getting good quality sleep. There's no magic number. The number of hours is different for everyone, but there's this 10-3-2-1-0 method. Makes it a little easier to remember. So 10-3-2-1. So 10 hours before bed, make sure you have no more caffeine at all. Okay, so it requires some planning on roughly what time you're going to go to bed. 10 hours before that, no more caffeine. 3 hours before bed, no food or alcohol. 2 hours before bed, no more work. 1 hour before bed, no more screen time. That includes phones. And 0 is the number of times you hit the snooze button. So getting out of the habit of snoozing. And again, this is research, evidence-based. You can Google it. It's out there. It's a pretty well respected technique for getting good sleep. And then, of course, maintaining connections. The risks and dangers of social isolation have forever been, you know, a hot topic in social psychology. And now with the impact of COVID, it's like skyrocketed, and we hear about it constantly. So I don't feel the need to elaborate too much on that. I mean, I think we all know how important it is to maintain some level of connectivity, and even if it's not in person, face to face, just staying connected to positive relationships is really important. All right, so some tried and true stress reduction strategies. Again, news you can use hopefully soon. Step 1, schedule and take time off. Okay, not the same as like a desperate sick day because you've just had enough. But I'm talking plan, arrange coverage of your responsibilities, you know, take advantage of the people that say they want to help and will be there for you if this is a personal life thing that you have to take time off for. And then trust in your plan that you developed, you know, trust in the people that you've brought into the mix to be able to do this so that you can truly disconnect and recharge. And you have to use that time wisely, use it to recharge. It's really important to disconnect from the responsibilities of caretaking. It doesn't have to be for a very long period of time. It could be, you know, if this is disconnecting from some personal responsibilities, it might only need to be for a few hours. If it's connecting from work, it might need to just be a day, you know, but the point is to truly disconnect. Eat a good meal. Watch some TV, read a book that's been on your nightstand, listen to music, whatever it might be, just something that is completely separate from the responsibilities that sort of drove you to the point where you need a day off. Debriefing is also really important, whether it's a tough session or a tough day that you had. It's important to have at least one person that is a trusted confidant, right? It might be a supervisor, a colleague, a friend, a family member. It might be a therapist. It might be contact Talkline. You know, it might be an anonymous person, but they're trusted because they're anonymous, you know, and they're there to be non-judgmental. But it's a way to just vent. Venting is valuable. Getting that out is really important. Again, this is a particular place where it can be really hard for the person, which I imagine all of you are, who everyone always comes to for support. And what I would share with you is something that a good friend and colleague of mine has shared with me, and that's the concept of deposits and withdrawals, okay? So as caretakers, I'm sure you all have made deposits in that way. People have come to you and you've been there for them. And now it's time, and most people on the other end will be okay if you ask to make a withdrawal and ask for some of that time back. Most people are willing to return the favor, and all you have to do is ask. So don't think of it as that other person just making an automatic, let me know if you need something. Actually ask them to return the favor, and just kind of then debrief about that tough day. If it's professional and it's with a client, here's where your supervisor is just critical. Use your next session or reach out and schedule a session to debrief a tough case. You do not have to be an island unto yourself, for sure. And then there's all kinds of breathing techniques for in the moment or something to practice regularly to kind of help bring down all that blood pressure, heart rate, all of that that's happening. It can be really important to not wait until it gets to the point where you have to, but practice this kind of stuff regularly so that it comes a little more naturally in the tough moments. But Foursquare breathing it has a true physiological impact. I mean, it's taught in the military and special forces to keep calm under extreme pressure. And what it is you breathe in and count to 4, hold for a count of 4, breathe out to a count of 4, and then hold for a count of 4 and repeat. So it's really simple. Foursquare, that's all you have to remember, 4 by 4. Others are different breathing techniques. I encourage you to Google some things to see what would fit for you. But another common one, I used this in college all the time when I was under, pressure during midterms, finals, and like having an internship and a job and all of that, and everything just felt overwhelming. And it seemed like everything always came to a head at the same time. Like finals were the same thing at the same time as, peak season at work and all of that. It just always seems to happen that way. And so I always used 4-7-8 breathing to help me fall asleep. Because if any of you are anything like me, it's as soon as your head hits the pillow, you could be exhausted, but when your head hits the pillow, your mind just goes into overdrive. So 4-7-8 is breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 7, breathe out for a count of 8. Now that's the ideal, but basically the concept is that your out breath is longer than your in breath. And essentially what's behind that is you're letting go. You're giving yourself a chance to breathe out and let go of the stress and anxiety. The other thing why breathing and breathing counts help is because when your mind is focusing on counting your breath, it's probably not focusing on the millions of other things that are provoking your anxiety and nerves and whatever else is going on. So it's about shifting your focus to your breath, which can really help. All right. So the other critical piece is self-awareness, right? So we're really good at helping other people become aware of their quote quirks and their behaviors and their stressors and all of that. But sometimes it can be really hard to look inward. So I'm gonna ask you to do that a little bit for the greater good. So obviously all of these things can be started at every moment, but it's certainly easier to start building those good habits before things get overwhelming. And again, caretakers are especially susceptible to like self-blindness because we are so other focused. We're so outwardly focused, but it is really important to spend some time focusing inward. I think and just to recognize and accept that is a huge step in the right direction. The other thing you have to do is really take some time to look at your own personal prejudices and stereotypes. And I don't just mean, I mean, certainly multiculturally, but also just all of those shoulds. There's a psychological theorist, and her name is escaping me at the moment. I'm sorry, I think it's Horney, who coined the term the tyranny of the shoulds. So all those things that we tell ourselves that we should know better, we should act better, do better, be better, life should be different, better, easier, I should be a better therapist, case manager, mother, brother, daughter, grandson, all of that. What it does is it creates a divide. It creates two separate things, an ideal and reality. It separates the ideal from reality. And that separation, which is, just it's created, it's not real. It leads to anxiety and unhappiness. And so it's really important to take a minute to listen to the language, listen to the way you're talking to yourself, and stop doing that. I have a dear colleague who says, stop shoulding all over yourself because it's just not fair. You're not being fair to yourself. So keep that in mind when you're looking inward. So some inspiration. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it's really helpful for it to be consistent. So I'm a fan, in case you haven't noticed, of just Googling things. I've told you to Google a couple things so far. Don't be afraid of technology. Embrace it and Google stuff. So I've tried here to give credit where credit's due. I found things on Pinterest. I've, found a whole bunch of things, but the important thing is that it's not complicated, but that it's consistent. I would say aim for, if you can, 30 minutes a day, just taking some time to yourself to look, to think, at least think about self-care and plan. Other things, research shows that it takes 21 days to form a habit. So if you start doing something, do it consistently for 21 days and it will become a habit. That's important to know when you're trying to change a routine. I always say, try something 3 times before you decide that it's not for you. I've said this to people, as a crisis worker, someone who maybe has never had therapy, they've never talked to a therapist before. Give it 3 sessions before you decide that it's not for you, or maybe this particular therapist is not a good fit. If an activity is not a good fit, give it 3 times. The first 2 times are usually awkward anyway. So whether you're going to implement a new exercise routine or a therapist or a hobby or activity or whatever it is, give it 3 tries. I personally think that something that helps me is a task or an activity that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and ideally a finished product. Because so much of what I do for a living is unfinished or undone, it helps to have something outside of work that has a finished product, to have a sense of accomplishment. That kind of open-endedness of behavioral health work can be very draining. Same thing as a caretaker in your personal life. It is going to go on long term. So having a hobby, something that has your full attention and that you have a finished product, can be just very stress relieving. So what I have here, though, is the big list of self-care activities. So there's a whole form of therapy that many of you might be familiar with called DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Treatment. And they have this list, which you can Google and get. This is not the list, the image that I have here. But you can Google big list of self-care activities and you'll find the exact list adapted from the DBT workbook. And it has well over 100 activities on it, ranging from talk or text a friend, go for a walk someplace peaceful, draw, paint, or color, watch a funny movie, sign up for a class, do or learn something exciting like kayaking, surfing, skiing, journal, learn a new language, plant a garden. Just to give you some examples of the variety of activities that are considered self-care. And basically what all these are opportunities for you to do something outside of the things that cause you stress in your daily life. It really just taking small steps are important. Like I said, I consider exercise a 4-letter word, but moving more, yeah, I could do that. I could take a walk. I could get up off my butt and not watch a 4th or 5th episode of Downton Abbey, which is my latest obsession. But it takes small steps. If you want to pick up a new hobby, like say painting or crafting, you don't have to go to Michael's and spend $150 on every supply. Like, go to the dollar store and see what they have to offer to get what you need to start something, but start small. This particular image here, the self-care ideas, 5, 10, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour or more. I mean, you could search, again, I just looked for self-care activities. You come up with anything. The point is, find something that makes sense and fits for you. You could search it by amount of time you have. You can search it by your profession. Self-care for therapists, self-care for men, self-care for women, self-care for, fill in the blank. And it's going to give you all kinds of, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different examples and things that you can do. Another key thing is to write it down. So this image, I don't expect you to be able to see all this. I know it's probably very small, but what I did was I screenshotted, I Google image searched self-care plan and came up with 100 different examples. But we talk to people all the time about how important it is to write things down, right? I know myself, I forget things. I make lists, I have a planner, to make sure that I complete all of my responsibilities in a given day, a week, month, whatever it might be. I say it's just as important to include self-care in that. Schedule it into your calendar, your agenda, whatever it is. Journal about it. Sometimes when you write it down, it becomes more of a promise to yourself. And it can be as simple as a list, down in the right-hand corner, you see it looks just like a list. And then there's other ones that are like more colorful and complicated and prompt you to think about all the different spheres of self-care, mind, body, spirit, whatever it might be. But the point is that you're making a commitment to yourself to do this by writing it down and putting it in your schedule. And if you put it on the calendar, you're making everyone else know, the people around you know that this is your time to do this for yourself. And that's just as important. So to recap a little bit, stress is a part of life. Our physical response to it is 100% automatic. Very little we can do to stop that from happening, but certainly techniques to slow it down and mitigate it in the moment. And basically, stress management self-care is a series of choices that you have to make. That's just sort of the bottom line. And it can be simple and highly enjoyable with just a little bit of prep work, a little bit of planning and practice. And doing it over and over again. So I just, in addition to having time for questions we have about 15 minutes to go through some of the chat questions. And I also would like to hear, feel free to put it in your chat if there's anything that you've been thinking about that you'll do today to make some room in your stew pot. And I'll leave the screen up with my contact information so that you can write it down if you'd like. Okay.
Nicole, there were a couple questions in the chat. One is, do you have any recommendations for reduced memory and brain fog?
reduced memory and brain fog is a symptom of just being overly stressed and kind of reaching that boiling over point. So any one of these suggestions can work for that. I also think that, you know, I'm a person, I'll share personally. I know when I'm reaching my limit, when I'm sitting at my computer and I have 14 tabs open of things that I'm working on, and yet I'm not getting anything done. So for me, prioritizing in a list, you know, like I said, whether it's journaling, to-do list, whatever it might be, making a list, having it physically in front of me and checking things off can be, not only can it be helpful to organize, but to, you know, have a sense of accomplishment. Look at all this that I did today. I was actually able to get all this done. That's really important. Mm-hmm.
The other one we had was, do you have someone who you recommend, like a talk line that's not an emergency, so you can chat with someone about certain situations?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to, while we're talking, just give me a minute and I'll put it in the chat. But I highly recommend Contact Talkline. It's a warm line. And it's available every day from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. And that, I mean, what you're asking for, non-emergency, just to chat, that's exactly what that is. So I am going to find that for you.
I will say that one of the benefits I think of COVID is that therapy can be easier to get to. You don't have to necessarily drive somewhere. There's a lot of online resources for telehealth if you need that.
Absolutely. Okay. So I'm going to put in the chat the contact number. If I could spell, that would help. It's 215-355-6000. And I'll put it's every day. I have here 8A to 8P, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to put 8A to 8P just to be safe, but I think they go until 10P most days.
And what was the name of that line again, Nicole? What was it called?
Contact Talkline.
Okay.
Another great resource for all kinds of supports in the local area, in the Bucks County area, is NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they have all, I mean, their website is really easy to navigate, and they have all kinds of in-person, telephone, virtual options for support. It's it can be really helpful. And then for those of you on the line who are either first responders, families of first responders, or frontline healthcare workers, which would include behavioral healthcare workers, the first responder peer support team for COVID has expanded to healthcare workers. It was previously essentially a warm line for first responders and their families, but we have expanded to frontline healthcare workers, and that number is 267-893-5400. The calls are routed through the Lenape Valley Foundation Crisis Center, but you get transferred to a volunteer first responder on call. And it's confidential. The crisis staff will ask you for your name and phone number just in case something happens and you get disconnected, but you don't have to give it if you don't want to. It's fine. It can be completely anonymous. And then they'll just transfer you to the first responder that's on call for support. So like I said, for those of you who might be first responders, family members of first responders, or frontline healthcare workers, including behavioral health. That could be a resource for you for the same thing, kind of that non-judgmental support, just an ear, an understanding ear. What else do we have here? I see someone's going for a walk today. That's really, what a great day for a walk too. You know, one of the things I was thinking of in preparing for this is that on a cold, damp, dreary February day, which we've had so many, but yet not today. Today's beautiful. Get out there if you can and soak up the sun.
I think we have a question from Ellen. Ellen, you're welcome to unmute yourself and jump in if you have a question.
Yeah, I had a question. Can you repeat what that term was that you said earlier? Was it DVT or something? Dialect? I didn't catch the rest of that.
Oh, it's DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy.
Is that something you can Google?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's tons of research on it. Lenape Valley Foundation has a treatment track for it. And it's a skills-based treatment for all kinds of things, behavioral health related. And essentially it helps teach people how to manage overwhelming emotions using positive and adaptive coping skills rather than some of the, you know, horrible things we do to ourselves and the people around us when we're struggling. So it's a form of behavioral health treatment.
I popped a link in the chat that links to some DBT information on Lenape's website and the contact information for our outpatient director should you have more interest in pursuing that.
Can I ask another question, Nicole? This is Ellen.
Sure.
One of the things that I'm struggling with is I'm caregiving for my elderly mom who lives 2 hours away from me, and I have 3 other siblings, but they all live 500 miles or more away. And, you know, I'm just feeling like a lot of the burden is just on me. And also as like a caretaker personality, like you were saying, you know, that I'm a person that thinks about other people before myself. But I find, unfortunately, in this situation now, I'm finding that because I've been like that, the friends that I have aren't able to be there for me like I am with them. I almost feel like you set up a pattern where, you know, or maybe I've picked more needy people. So it's like, you know, I need something back now, but I can't get it from them because, you know what I mean? They're needier than me and they're used to me being the one that they rely on.
Sure.
So can you give me some ideas on, I guess,
I don't
maybe
have it on
first of
video. Well, I do, but I don't.
maybe first of all, how I can, you know, I don't know. I've tried to communicate the situation as clearly as I can to my siblings, but, you know, I don't know. I know you can't control other people, but how do I get people to step up more and participate or find other people, like I said, that I can rely on that, you know, to help me through this situation? Because it's really stressful. A lot of the things you mentioned earlier about how you can tell if you're like at the breaking point, I could totally identify with.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm happy to hear that you've at least tried to reach out, and you bring up a good point that sometimes the deposits and withdrawals doesn't work. You know, it's not always as fair as that. So you've identified that the people around you are not going to be able to be there for you in the way that you need them to be. But I'm very impressed that you made that step. To find that out. Some people are afraid to even make that step. So if that's the case, then maybe you do have to reach outside of your immediate network for help. And that's where getting resources is really important. So it might start with a talk line, just to kind of talk it out, to figure out what you need with a very, very sympathetic, very non-judgmental, but sort of a sounding board. Because if you've been doing this for a while, chances are you have it within you to figure out what it is, but that overwhelmingness can block the problem solving. Then, I mean, no one can take care of a person all by themselves. It's not fair. It's not realistic either. So I think getting the right resources. So one option would be reaching out to, now I gave the link for NAMI Bucks, maybe reaching out to the organization, whatever it is that your mom is struggling with far away. Like if it's behavioral health, reaching out to the local NAMI chapter. If it's Alzheimer's, reaching out to the local Alzheimer's Association chapter, whether it's other physical issues, reaching out to, a local, her healthcare provider and finding out, what is the local chapter of the aging services at the county level, things like that, to find some support locally right there in her backyard, that can be that. If you've tried with your siblings for help, I think continuing to go down the same roads is just going to lead to more frustration. So I think finding a new path of options for help it might be the way to go.
Okay, thank you.
We gotta,
I
when you asked
struggle
us,
with a lot of,
go ahead, Ellen.
I was just going to say also what's come up a lot for me is I struggle with a lot of shame about it. Like you've mentioned, I'm not good enough. I'm this, I'm that. Like we argue a lot because she doesn't feel like she needs as much help as she does. And then I react and I just think, oh God, and I know I'm not helping like rationally, but emotionally, it just puts me in this really, I don't know if I should use the word dark, but that's what came, you know what I mean? Unhealthy place that I don't want to be in, but I'm under stress and I'm, just have a lot of balls in the air to manage. So, and boundaries, like I feel bad because I've thought about like saying things to her friends or maybe asking them to check in with her more. But then I feel like, I don't want to make her seem incompetent. You know what I'm saying? Like, but she needs more help really than what she's willing to admit at this point. I feel like with caregiving, there can be a real in between area where the person is still functioning. I mean, she's functioning at a pretty high level, but yet I can see things changing, so it's like, she's not what she was, but she's not, certainly not nursing home or any of that material, so it's like this weird gray area. I feel like I'm trying to navigate.
Well, it can be really hard too for a child to point that out to their parents, and anyone who's coming from a perceived, like a lower place, right? A child to a parent, or for in therapy, sometimes if you're significantly younger than your client, it could, that kind of same thing, like, who are you to tell me what's best? So sometimes the option is to not be the one to point that out, to get other people, her doctor, are you able to provide some information to her healthcare professional so that they can do an assessment and give her that information as an outside person. That might be the way. Friends, maybe. I don't know the relationship that your mom has with her friends or how close they are. I don't know that, but I do think hearing that, not taking all of that on for yourself and kind of sharing that, even if it's not with your siblings, but with other people in your mom's life, healthcare providers, I would say, is probably ideal. I'm very sorry to cut this off, but I'm realizing the time and want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to wrap this up now, but you have my contact information, you have the agency's information. Please feel free to reach out with additional questions or concerns. And thank you so much for participating and for a good discussion.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
We'll
you
put the
very much.
recording. We'll put the recording on Lenape's website, so you're welcome to check back. We're hoping to offer these monthly, and March's will be to be determined, but we'll make sure that you guys all get the information. So thank you again.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.